So Carmelo, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. And my chapter in the volume do three things. First, it assesses the overall situation and trends in terms of housing in Cuba. Second, identifies and analyzes the causes of the housing problems that the island is facing. Three, it describes the most important reform policies introduced by Raúl Castro since 2007 and their effects. And last, four, resumes key findings and suggests policies for the future. So a major obstacle that I found in my work is the serious lack of housing statistics. And I don't want to go into details, but data on Cuba essentially on housing is the construction, the number of units built by year, and what percentage is done by the state and what by the non-state sector or the private sector. There are figures that are collected in Cuba, for instance, by the Ministry of Justice in terms of the permits given for construction, new housing construction, but they are not released. Therefore, this is a major problem. The 1960 reform, which was one of the first laws of the revolutionary government, facilitated ownership of a dwelling. But what they did was that all the people that were renting houses to private owners, those houses were confiscated, and then the government requested that the lessee kept paying their monthly rental, and then after a period of years, the house or the apartment became the ownership of the former rentee. So by this mean, 85% of the Cuban population became owner of the house. And this is probably one of the highest proportion in Latin America. However, the reforms had also flaws and shortcomings that resulted in a severe housing crisis. So let me give you some figures. Can you see it? Okay,
yes, we can.
Okay, so the blue bars are the number of housing per 1,000 built in Cuba since 2006. That's the year prior to Raúl, well, he took over in mid-2006. And as you can see, there was a decline from 111,400 in 2006 to 21,800 in 2017. All these are official data published in Cuban Statistical Yearbook. And the orange bar is the number of units built per 1,000 inhabitants. And it also goes down from 9.9 to 1.9. There seems to be a visual stagnation in the last 2 years available. So this has been a major problem in Cuba, and also the quality of housing deteriorated very sharply. I have been in Havana several times. I noticed very significant changes between 1980 and 1990, and then between 1990, the next time that I went there, 2010, and the last time, which was last year. Of course, there are areas of the city that have been beautifully restored, such as the old Havana, particularly around the Plaza Central, and also the La Plaza Vieja. But that's a relatively small sector of the city, and you just walk one block and you could see the tremendous devastation that have occurred. And in 2017, the government announced an increased housing deficit. It was set at 883,050. But my own calculations indicate that it's considerably higher, at least 1 million, at least. And in terms of the deterioration, from 23% to 26% of the population lacks housing, and at least 30% live in mediocre or poor dwellings. So which have been the major causes of these problems? And I would say there are mainly internal, but also there are some important external factors. In the first place, there have been traditionally, historically, scarcity of and high prices of construction materials. The second is a lack of maintenance of existing stock. The Cuban government has an agency that have been quite inefficient in taking care of this. Third, there is a very small and decreasing allocation of state budget resources to housing. Actually, housing is the second smaller assignment in the state budget. And then Cuba have been exporting cement in order to get hard currency. Therefore, there have been less cement available for housing construction in Cuba. And finally, but not the least important, a lot of legal restrictions and inefficiency. Concerning the external sector, the major factor is climate, weather, and at least since 2008, there have been 9 strong hurricanes in Cuba that have created considerable destruction. Despite the effort done, many dwellings have not been reconstructed or repaired. Now, let me go into the positive aspects of Raúl Castro reform. And this was a law enacted in 2011, and it tried to tackle the mentioned problems by reversing many of the foregoing negative policies created in 1960. The first and the most important one is that allow home selling and buying and market prices set by supply and demand. The second is that it guarantees the right to inheritance, as well as the transfer of homes to relatives of immigrant Cuba. That was not allowed before. The houses were confiscated. Now it can be inherited. And then mortgages were banned in Cuba since the 1960 reform, and they reintroduced mortgages, but not on the principal residence, but on the second one, because you are allowed to have 2 houses, one the mayor, the principal one, another one in the countryside or in the beaches. Or it could be also a mortgage on an empty lot. And then it permitted the population to build their own homes. That sounds surprising, but really, because of the limitations explained, very few people were able to build new housing. It liberated the sale of construction materials and also their prices to the population. And then the state granted subsidies to the needy, particularly those affected by hurricanes, and also granted microcredit to build or repair dwellings. It authorized real estate agents that were not allowed before, and it converted state buildings into private apartments and sold unfinished state housing to private individuals to complete them within a given period of time. Finally, it approved the renting of homes or rooms to tourists, and this is the probably the most lucrative of the self-employed occupations in Cuba today. Last, finally, it encouraged the inscription in and updating of the property registry that have been abandoned for many years. All these steps have generated a surge in private construction and repair that now accounts to 58% of total construction. So it has reversed a previous tendency. It was most housing were built by the state, and now it's built by the non-state private sector. But let me refer now to the negative aspects of this reform. The first one is that there have been recent measures started in 2017 that have halted or reversed the progress accomplished. Procedures to sell or buy a house or build one, as well as to get a state subsidy, are extremely bureaucratic and prolonged. It takes from 6 to 8 visits or actions in order to get these permissions. And this becomes disincentive for those activities. So I have identified 13 challenges. The first one is that the government sets a deadline to use the state subsidy, but sometimes it cannot be met because there are no facilities for construction, there are not enough workers in the private sector, and therefore the subsidy must be returned to the state. The second are errors and favoritism that have been found in conferring the subsidies. There is a lot of employees, state employees, involved in these procedures, and so significant state salaries or wages are wasted to grant relatively small subsidies. And third, construction materials are often not available, hence lengthening the time to build or repair a dwelling. And bribes are frequently asked to expedite a procedure. Four, only one house is allowed as a principal residency and a second one for recreation. And I conducted interviews with 2 Cuban social scientists in Havana in 2015, and none of the interviewees, there were 80, none of them had a second house. So there's only a relative minority of people who have that. 5, foreign investment for individual housing is banned. It should be allowed. Foreigners that are not permanent residents cannot buy a dwellings, except when they are members of a luxury golf course. 7, mortgages are not allowed to buy a principal residence, and there are no banks that emit mortgage bonds. Microcredit also is grossly insufficient. 8, the very low income of the population and the relatively high prices asked are major obstacles to buy a dwelling. 9, architects are banned to work as a self-employed in their profession. Any violation of this norm results in confiscation of a micro business. 10, despite the expansion of advertisement, only a minority has access to the internet, and it's very expensive, although this has been improving in the last year or so. In 2017, and this was one of the negative measures that I mentioned, the number of real estate agencies was cut by half because they perform activities that were legal in most countries of the world, but that the Cuban authorities deem as, quote, irregularities and infractions, unquote. 12, estate agent licenses were suspended until such irregularities are corrected. And finally, taxes for selling or buying a house have been substantially increased. There is another socialist path that Cuba perhaps should learn from, and it's China, that have achieved much better results on the Communist Party rule to produce a much more flexible housing policy. China's property law of 2007 allows national and foreign investors to own constructions on state-owned land. And once completed, it provides grants. It grants the right to sell those houses, lease and mortgage those rights for 70 years, and 40 to 50 years for industrial and commercial businesses. In Beijing, a resident family can buy 2 homes, and if they have a child up to 18 years of age, may buy another 2 for a total of 4. And there is no limitation for commercial use. Foreign permanent residents don't have restrictions to build and own homes, whereas big international groups have realty branches in China. Short of a move towards the full Chinese path, which seems inconceivable now, Cuba could eliminate or liberalize many of the restrictions that are a deterrent to housing development. For instance, to fill the official house deficit of 883,000 dwellings, the Cuban government will have to build 44,000 units annually in the next 20 years. We saw in the graph that it have been in the last 5 years anywhere between 21 and 25,000. So this is about half of what they will have to build. So this is basically impossible. The obvious solution, therefore, is to give more support to private housing construction and or repairs. The eradication of bureaucratic procedures will generate significant savings in state wages that could be used to grant more microcredit and subsidies. If the excessively bureaucratic procedures to authorize private construction are significantly simplified, there will be a significant increase in that activity. The 4% tax imposed on the real value of the selling homes could be reduced to 1/2, therefore encouraging people to pay such tax and reducing state inspections and red tape. Legally allow Cubans abroad to invest in housing for their relatives in Cuba would infuse certitude in a practice that now is risky. And why not permit international NGOs specialized on low-cost housing to help the Cubans? Other measures will be to give more freedom to real estate brokers, more access to the internet, and permit architects to work in the private sector. If these simple policies are not implemented, unfortunately, the current housing crisis will escalate, hurting even more the Cuban people. Thank you.